I know we're only a few episodes into this podcast, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that today's guest might take the all-time trophy for the most wholesome start to a radio career.
I did hospital radio in London, which was, this one goes out to Daniel in the renal ward. Here's Perry Como. And it was so fun.
As Cecelia Ramsdale progressed professionally, she moved into the big leagues with some help from a radio legend.
And he was like, yeah, I remember you. Next time you're in the city, come by and we'll have a chat.
But after the tragic, untimely passing of another radio genius, it was time to move on.
It was gut-wrenching, but it was the catalyst. And I was like, I just don't feel like I can be here anymore with him not here.
But what Cecelia learned in radio, she still uses in her work to this day.
My fingers just dance across the keyboards in Pro Tools and I know how to use it all. And it just makes that part of my job so much easier.
May your best years be ahead of you. I'm Andy Marr. This is Off Mic, Life After Radio. Cecelia Ramsdale is a voice actor based in Melbourne, Australia. Behind the microphone, there isn't much that she hasn't done, narrating TV shows, voicing commercials, cartoon characters and audiobooks. Cecelia also has podcasts of her own, including the No Books Book Club and the Wellness Collective. And while not technically attached to a radio transmitter, Cec does do work for the app-based radio station Broad Radio, a radio station for women by women. And now, my dear friends, in this podcast episode, we will be discussing the topic of suicide. It's about 13-14 minutes in. If you're having a tough time, there is help available. In Australia, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. In the UK, you can call 111. In the US, you can call 211. And in Canada, it's 988. Cec, so good to see you. How are you?
Hello, Andy. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Where do we find you today?
Here I am at home in my little part of the world, my Studio Brick studio, which is where I pretty much work most of the time these days.
Oh, that's amazing. So you're mostly doing voiceover these days?
Yeah, it's really interesting how much it's changed. I think back to, well, COVID, this is the only good thing that came out of COVID really that I can see is that working from home studios became normal and accepted, and so long as you had well-treated spaces and everything, you could work with anyone around the world. So, before that, I used to have to drop everything and jump in the car and drive to studios. It wasn't unusual to be in the car longer than I was in the studio. So
plenty of time for lip rolls to freak out the person in the car next to you at the lights.
That's true. Good old voice people.
Oh, mate, it never gets old. So I replaced you.
You did. I'm glad you brought that up.
Triple M in 2009. I was in an awful state in Sydney. I had taken what I thought was going to be my dream job at Triple M Sydney, and it turned into quite nightmarish conditions where I was out of bed at 10 to 3 every morning to produce breakfast. And I discovered the hard way that, I can barely make toast at that time of the morning. I'm not suited to breakfast.
Let alone promos.
Yeah, so I'm glad I got out of that and I got into doing the job that you were doing, which is producing promos, music montages and footy replays for Triple M Melbourne.
Yes.
Which was so much fun. But given that moving to Melbourne from Sydney as I did, had the side effect of me falling in love with the woman who is still the love of my life.
I thought you were going to say me then. I was like, hang on, that's awkward.
No.
No, okay,
not
good,
quite that awkward, but I do have
Yep.
to say a big, awkward, huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for letting me take that job and have the radical transformation in my life that followed shortly afterwards. I know that you didn't know it at the time, and it wasn't what you intended, but things got really awesome for me, so I'm really grateful.
I love that. I was ready for a change, and you were the guy who took over my role. But the funny thing is, I do remember reading the job description of the job I'd been doing for all these years, and I thought, oh my God, I wouldn't apply for that. I don't feel like I was actually capable of doing it, which of course I was, but maybe I think that's a little bit of the radio world where you kind of don't feel like you're ever really good enough. I don't know. It's a funny one.
Yeah, no, I loved that gig. It was just the antidote I needed after the breakfast hours because I'd get
Oh,
in
I
there and I
love
was
that.
producing Drive and getting in there on the weekends. And I lived across the road at the time, and I'd go upstairs and produce footy promos, and it was like, yeah, this is more my speed.
That was actually a really good gig too. So I don't know if they probably still do it, but
Yeah.
so someone is in the studio during the footy and you're literally pressing record, waiting for something really good to happen.
Yeah.
And then quickly editing that bit of highlight so that when it gets to the end of the quarter, you've got your footy highlights from that quarter. I actually really loved that gig too for a while, but then, every weekend is a lot. You've got to commit to that.
So was that your last radio job?
I was thinking about this. So after I left there, I still hosted Australian First, which was the really funny
yeah.
Australian music show on a Sunday night on the Fox network or the Hit network. And I loved that. I did it for about 6 years. I hosted it with Ben Wasley, with Dave Higgins and Becco.
Wow, what a trio.
I know. But that was a real hoot. I loved it. And I got paid like, I don't know, a couple of $100 a week to do it. So it wasn't really about the money. It was about just playing radio, and I got to do that in a really kind of safe and easy way, and I was so glad until one day I got called into the office of the program director and told that I was no longer needed on the show. I was being replaced by Ella Hooper, and I was unceremoniously dumped, and I'm sure that's not the first time you're going to hear the story of someone being unceremoniously dumped by someone in programming. But, and then I went on to I was doing a podcast, The Wellness Collective, which we did at Listener for a big part of it. And of course, that was at Southern Cross Stereo. So that was like being back in radio. And then I started working with Jo Stanley on her startup Broad Radio. So between all of that, I've kind of kept my toes in the radio pond for as long as possible. But currently, I'm not really doing much of it. And that's all right. This is what happens.
Yeah, you never know what might come next. But let's do a big rewind and go back to the start of your career. Where did you start in radio?
Right. So the first time I touched a panel was at PBS in Melbourne. I did a little radio course there, yeah. Then I moved to London and I did hospital radio in London, which was literally a volunteer thing where you would go into the hospital with a clipboard and go around a ward that you were allocated. I think I used to do the renal ward, and you would ask people who were there having a pretty miserable time for a song that they would like to hear. And then you'd go back and you'd put your show on and you'd be like, this one goes out to Daniel in the renal ward. Here's Perry Como. And it was so fun. I did that for a couple of months. And then
it's a really great service too. Fun and, worthwhile.
And it's also like a community station sort of set up in England. Like a lot of the hospitals have the radio stations associated with them for people to kind of get into it. And then I came back and did the Swinburne commercial radio graduate certificate. Can't remember, they don't have it anymore. Jim Barber was the guy who ran it. He was a legend. And again, I'm sure you're going to come across plenty of alumni from that course. It was great. We had like all these professionals that would come in and tell us all about the different roles. And so I did that for 6 months, and then I got a job in Horsham. So I moved to the country and did my country time. Yeah. And then I managed to find myself a little way to slip into Fox and Triple M via Lee Simon.
Lee Simon. G'day. He was the legend of TV and radio back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but then he pivoted into running the sport department at Triple M, which was like super smart and took off like a rocket. It's now an integral part of, people couldn't imagine Triple M without the football.
No, exactly. And that was all Lee. I remember the day he left, I was heartbroken. I was like, Lee, because I actually got into radio because of Lee. I did work experience at Triple M when I was at school. Yeah. Because I was always the radio nerd. There's like the people that you work with in radio that get radio. And then there are the people who just want to be famous, who were on Big Brother or whatever, or comedians, or, there's lots of people there's like two camps, I reckon.
Yeah.
So Lee was the program director at Triple M back in the 90s when I did my work experience. And when I was out in the country, my mum actually said to me, why don't you get in touch with that nice Lee Simon man and, ask him how you get a job in the city? And I was like, Mum, it's not quite that straightforward, but all right. So I sent him an email or I wrote him a letter. I can't even remember. And he was like, yeah, I remember you. Next time you're in the city, come by and we'll have a chat. And so we did. And then he was like, oh, you should get in touch with Blacko, Matt Nicholic, and you should get in touch with this guy. And here's Brian Ford's details. And da-da-da. And all of a sudden I was working casually at Fox. So, yeah, amazing.
What were you doing at Fox casually?
So I was literally carting or filling in for some audio producing stuff and paneling. They were the first two things, just to kind of get me in the door. Yeah.
Yeah. And where did that take you?
Well, I ended up starting to do some voiceover work from there. So I did, Hamish and Andy, 9 to 5 weekdays, not the time. But yes, I did lots of that kind of, the Matt and Joe show, that kind of stuff. And then I got a job with Tony Martin on Get This as the assistant producer. And that was brilliant. That was probably my most enjoyable year of radio, I think, working on that show and also doing, audio producing. And yeah, that was a wild ride. Talk about meeting famous people. I was like, oh, hi, that's Weird Al Yankovic, why not?
Well, a previous guest on this show, Stephen Walter Gerard, credits Tony Martin for getting him into So I do regret not getting the chance to listen to Get This because that was on.
You still can. It's still available on podcast.
Okay. I've got no excuse then. But it went to air back when I was overseas, and
of course,
I just remember. I remember when it got axed, there was a big protest outside the radio station. I saw photographs, and someone had a big sign saying "Release the bees." It's like,
what does that mean?
Oh, this is a unique crowd. He's obviously made a very, very special thing.
It was like a cult in some ways. It was. There were in-jokes that would keep coming back over and over. Warwick Capper, Richard Marsland, of course, was working on it. And he's somebody who, again, if you're in radio, you might know of Richard. He was an absolute gem of a human being, no longer with us. But, there was this whole Warwick Capper thing that he did where he made you can actually download it. I think I've got it on my phone, where you can download all these grabs of Warwick Capper saying things, and he turned it into a whole thing. So
a soundboard?
Yeah, a soundboard, yeah. Oh, here we go. I have got it. It's called the Marsland 5000. Yeah. Let me see what it plays.
All right, that's good stuff.
So these were always peppered through the show, and there was a whole universe that was created. And, very dedicated listeners. And it was a real shame when it was axed. But, maybe sometimes it's good to go out on top.
It never made sense to me why some comedy shows got flicked because they had too dedicated an audience. It was just, come on, what's wrong with that?
Yeah. I reckon if it had had another year, it would have probably even grown bigger and broader because it was really at its height, I feel, when it was axed. And I even created, this is one of my favourite things too, I created a sketch and Tony Martin played it in the show.
All right.
Yeah,
what was it about?
Crowning highlight. It was actually Richard Marsland talking to Matthew McConaughey.
Okay.
It was Matthew McConaughey taken from, this is something that happened all the time too in the show, that these sketches would be made with grabs of someone, hence the Marsland 5000 app you can get, and then insert your conversation. So it was like a fake conversation.
Yeah.
It's still around somewhere. I haven't got a copy of it, but it's definitely in the podcasts and stuff. And I'm sure someone listening to this will be like, oh, I've got it.
I've certainly got some homework to do.
You do.
Yeah. So what happened after to Get This for you?
I was just really doing audio producing, but I'd started to ramp up my voiceover work too. So I was working on a couple of cartoons, but part of the reason I left though was I mentioned Richard Marsland before. So Richard was a comedian. He was a radio nerd from way back. He was so good at radio, so good, one of the best. He was really interested in the craft, like you say about the comedy shows. He had a really good ear for things. He was really dedicated, but if you do listen to the Get This podcast, Richard features heavily and you can tell how wonderful he was. I used to always say to him, and he always apologised, and I'd say, Richard, you might only have a limited number of sorries. Don't use them all up on this. Like, you don't need to be sorry. It's okay. He ended up working on The Breakfast Show with Miff Warhurst and
Pete Hellier
that next year. And then at the end of that year, he died. He passed away, and it was his choice. So it was gut-wrenching. Absolutely gut-wrenching. I mean, who knows what goes through someone's mind when that happens, and you can try and figure it out forever and a day, and even all these years later, it still gives me goosebumps to think about it. But it really did change something in my mind about working there. I just couldn't, it was kind of the catalyst. I mean, it wasn't the reason, but it was the catalyst. And I was like, I just don't feel like I can be here anymore.
Yeah.
With him not here. And I know that sounds really stupid because we weren't that close, really. We worked together and we were mates, but we weren't close mates. But I absolutely adored him, and he was always so supportive and wonderful.
He was a very large figure in the Pete and Miff show, and it kind of, I mean, they finished the very last thing of their last show was replaying one of his sketches. So there was that show never really recovered from that either.
No. Yeah, and again, to this day, everyone who knew him still has a very big Richard-sized part of their heart because he really was one in a million.
What do you miss about radio?
I miss the people, but I miss the urgency. We need to get someone to talk about this. Let's do it quickly. All right, what do we got? Who can we find? Okay, this person, they might know. Like that kind of like the pace of it, and the fact that you do something and it's gone. And apart from get this, it's gone and people won't notice it, So you do make mistakes or you try and get things sorted out, but it's those quick decisions and making things move. Like it's really dynamic, and that's the fun of it, I think, too.
I remember once I was working at Triple M Sydney when Ugly Phil was doing the night show, and I just saw how absolutely invigorated he got when I was running from one studio to another. He just sort of got on comms. It was like, I love it when that happens. This is radio. It's like,
yeah, exactly. Move it.
yeah. So much fun. Yeah.
Even like you say, like edits, getting really good edits, doing promos. Like I'm so glad I still get to do radio voiceover work because I love it. I'm like, it's these little snippets of joy in 10 seconds, and I don't know, something wrong with me. But anyway, I do. I love it.
That's awesome. But what don't you miss?
I don't miss the politics. I don't miss the kind of, emails about, such and such has decided to move on. And well, have they? I don't know. I think the culture of it sometimes lacked a bit of compassion.
Yeah.
There were certain leaders that were fabulous and certain leaders that weren't. And I really don't miss that. That kind of like the bullshitting. People can see through this. Don't treat people poorly. And I, from what I've heard, obviously it's a really tough time in radio presently with talks of mergers and all of that stuff. And I'm sure morale is really tricky at the moment. And I really feel for everybody in that situation because it's, I don't know. Is it necessary? I don't know.
Back to your on-air work. What was the biggest mistake on air that you ever made?
Oh my God, so funny. So I did some announcing shifts because I always wanted to be on air, but I couldn't kind of find my way to do that. Apart from Australian First, that was great. But I loved being on air with someone, which is why I love podcasts because it's the banter. And I was doing this Saturday morning shift on Triple M, and I had to back announce an In Excess song, and it was from the album Shabu Shabar. And I said, from the album Shabu Shabar, also I just completely cocked it up. And I got a text message from a friend going, do you not know how to say that In Excess album? I was like, let's just quickly go to the next thing. So that was pretty bad. And then I remember once a time where I first started at Fox and I was paneling in OB with Ben Wasley. Bless his cotton socks. Still mates with him to this day. Yeah. Very good mates.
Great guy.
And because I wasn't familiar with, was it Maestro, the system? I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, Maestro was what they were using for a long time.
And it I had too many things loaded, so it had scrolled up. And so what I thought was the top thing that was about to play wasn't. So I was firing things and they were the wrong things. And it was just this diabolical, oh my God, I still have like cold sweats thinking about it. The idea of paneling, I can do it, but honestly, when now everything has become so fancy and, you can use clots to put it through here and there, and when you can panel a thing that's in a different state, I'm like, no, this is not me. Okay, I'll just be over here and you get someone else to do that who knows what they're doing. Because, that's horrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a panel op for Talkback Radio for a couple of years and, talk about things I don't miss.
Panel ops need to be given their kudos. It's a really hard job. And if it goes wrong, everyone knows about it. That's what I always think is quite the funny part of it.
It's the only time you're ever noticed as a panel op when things go wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Thankless task.
That's right.
Shout out to all the panel operators.
Yeah, we see you. We hear you.
Oh, Cess?
Yeah.
Have you seen this all-staff email from the boss? Apparently you and I are going to be wished well in our future endeavours if we don't stick to the log. Can you get us out to a break? Can you give us a forward sell?
Coming up, one of the classic hits from In Excess that's not on Shabu Shabar.
Still to come in this episode with Cecelia Ramsdale. We'll talk about what skills she took with her from radio that she still uses today, and why aren't there more women in audio production?
It's got nothing to do with whether you were born with one set of chromosomes or another.
What's the best thing that you've taken from radio into what you do today in terms of what you learned?
Well, I think it's interesting because mostly what I do these days is voiceover work. I'm so glad I had that grounding in radio where I learnt how to make promos and I learnt how to edit quickly and I learnt how to edit voice. Like I find it really interesting when you listen to a podcast or you listen to an edit of something and the voice hasn't been edited well. I'm like, what? Well, it's not that hard. Let's get this right, people. Anyway, So I use that information and those skills and my fingers just dance across the keyboards in Pro Tools and I know how to use it all. And it just makes that part of my job so much easier. Because I'm not trying to figure out all the techie bits because I'm not really that interested in the techie bits. I was so lucky too because when I started Adult Stereo in the audio producing department, I was working with a bunch of absolute legends. Matt Nicklick, Matt Curry, John Lindray, who is no longer with us, passed away from cancer years ago. He was the commercial producer. Matt Bauer. There was a lot of Matts. And I was the only girl. Oh, there was also a couple of others, Andy Galino and Dean Thomas. But I was the only female in this group. And they were so supportive of me. I mean, I was keen to learn, but they were patient. They always showed me what to do. I remember one day I went into Matt Curry and I said, I'm making this promo. Can you just come and have a listen to it? Because I'm not quite sure if I've got it right. And Matthew Curry is a beautiful man. He got up and he goes, oh, you've got ears, haven't you? And I went, oh, I guess. And he goes, well, trust your judgment. That's what he was saying. He was saying, trust your judgment.
Okay, yeah.
And that was a really good piece of advice because I was like, you know what? It's true. I might not be the producer that has to play everything. I'm not into making sure all the technical specs are hitting this and that, but I've got ears and I'm like, yeah, okay, I like the sound of that. That sounds good. That's the way I work. So, yeah. That's definitely helped.
I've worked with a fair number of female producers, production people over the years, like yourself, Mel Alger at ARN, Liz Campbell in Canada. I'm probably forgetting more than I'm saying, but why?
Kelly Fullstone.
Kelly, yeah, she was amazing. Why do you think though that there aren't as many women in audio production as there are men? It seems to be kind of a blokey thing.
Yeah, I don't know, because that's always what I wanted to do. Maybe it's that whole thing of you can't be what you can't see. And so, but there are more now, and so that's good. I like that because it's, they probably bring a different ear.
Certainly, and some of the stuff that I've heard from women production people is better than I could have done. And it's like, yeah, all right,
it's got nothing to do
great.
with whether you were born with one set of chromosomes or another.
No.
Just have you got ears? You've got ears, haven't you? That's all you need to know.
Yes, nice callback.
Yeah.
She's worked comedy, people. She's worked comedy.
Bring it home.
Speaking of comedy, everyone loves a
Yes.
prop.
Oh, what have you got?
I've got a fortune cookie.
Am I going to get a fortune?
I'm going to crack open my Kung Fu Sing fortune cookie
Yeah.
and I'm going to read you the
Definitely
fortune.
a genuine Asian name for it, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's
Go
the
on.
best. It's the best thing to be able to go to a supermarket, buy a box of fortune cookies, and write them off on tax.
Yes.
And I've just got to switch glasses because I'm getting
Okay.
old.
'Cause you're getting old.
Okay. We need not think alike to love alike.
Oh.
How does that apply to your radio career, Cess?
We need not think alike to love alike. Okay, well, yeah, that fits because I was never really, didn't really ever fit in. I don't know why. Like, I remember working at Fox FM and, you know, I loved working in radio. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I remember sitting there, oh yeah, I hear you crunching, talking to the music director at the time who was Scott Baker Smith, and I was like, do we need to play Lady Gaga every hour? And he was like, well, this is what they want. I'm like, is it what they want or is it what you're telling them they want?
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a pop music aficionado. So I did find it quite strange working at Fox in particular.
Yeah.
Triple M a bit more. I was a bit more rocky and I kind of would listen to Triple M. But Fox, I was like, I just don't get this. Same when I worked in the country and, you know, back announcing these songs and I was like, who? Ashanti? What? Who is this? I don't know what this music is. And I got the hang of it because it just becomes like you learn the ropes, right?
Yeah.
But I never loved the music. So what was my fortune?
We need not think alike to love alike.
There we go. I think that fits.
Well, Cess,
Yes.
this has been amazing.
It's been
Thank
fun.
you so much for coming on Off Mic Life After Radio. I'm
Oh,
so
I
glad
love
that
it.
so glad that things are going beautifully for you after walking away from the transmitter full time as well.
Yeah, well, you never say never. That's one thing I will say. Be a good person to work with, love what you do, and it all comes back around, you know? So that's what I hope that other radio people might think about me because that's definitely what I think about most of them. But good to see you, Andy, even if it is through the screen.
Magic of cameras, yeah.
Yeah. Good luck with your podcast. This is a great
Thank you.
idea too. So I look forward to having a listen to all the other old grumpy people and seeing what they've got to say.
And
Do yourself a favour and listen to Get This.
yes, intersperse the podcasts of Cess with and other ex-radio people with the Get This podcast.
Yes. Oh, and if
And
you
the
need a
Wellness
female
Collective.
voiceover, you can come and see me as well. Yep.
Yeah, and
Always here.
yeah,
And you.
and the No Book Club.
Yes, I know. Gosh, busy.
Too much on. Thanks heaps, Cess.
All right. See you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
That's the thoroughly awesome Cecelia Ramsdale. If you want more inspiration about finding your transferable skills, go back and listen to our previous episode with former radio announcer, program director, and now media advisor, Matt Whittemore.
Telling a story is telling a story. How you set up a narrative is pretty much the same. I understood market appeal, which is why I kind of got the job I did.
If there's something about the transition out of radio into new careers that you don't think I've been covering so far on these podcasts, I'd love to know about it. You can leave me a comment on YouTube, look me up on LinkedIn, or you can find the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Just look for the name Off Mic, Life After Radio. I'm Andy Marr. May your best years be ahead of you.